future wife. If you're listening to this someday, I want you to know that there was a time when I almost gave up. Not on love, not on you, because I didn't even know you yet. I almost gave up on myself. There were nights so quiet that even my own heartbeat felt lonely. Days when I smiled for everyone else while carrying battles nobody could see. I walked through storms that left scars on my soul, and more than once, I wondered if happiness was something meant for other people, but somehow, deep inside me, there was a small voice that refused to disappear, a voice whispering that maybe, somewhere in this world, you existed. Maybe one day, your hand would find mine, maybe one day, your love would heal the parts of me that life had broken, and that's why I kept going. So today, future wife, I want to tell you a story. A story about the man I was before I found you. A story about the pain, the hope, the darkness, and the reason I almost gave up, because one day, when you're beside me, you'll deserve to know how close I came to losing faith.
And why the
Thought of you saved me before we ever met, future wife. Before you ever became a dream in my heart, before I imagined what your voice might sound like, or what it would feel like to hold your hand, there was a version of me that very few people knew. Most people saw a smile, they heard laughter. They assumed everything was fine because that's what people often do. They look at someone standing and assume he is strong. They hear him say, "I'm okay," and assume the story ends there. But the truth is that some of the hardest battles are fought in complete silence. There was a time when I woke up every morning carrying a weight I couldn't explain. Nothing dramatic happened overnight. There was no single moment when the sky fell apart. Instead, life became a collection of disappointments, unanswered questions, and quiet hurts that slowly piled on top of each other until I could barely recognize the person underneath. I remember walking through crowded places and feeling completely alone. Isn't that a strange thing? Being surrounded by people and still feeling as though nobody can truly see you. Conversations happened around me. Smiles were exchanged. Life continued moving forward. Yet inside, it felt as though I was standing still while the rest of the world raced ahead. I kept asking myself what was wrong with me. Why did happiness seem so easy for everyone else? Why did other people appear to have direction while I felt lost? Why did it seem as though I was constantly trying and constantly falling short? The questions became louder than the answers. Some nights I would lie awake long after midnight, staring into darkness. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because I couldn't stop thinking. My mind replayed every mistake I had ever made. Every opportunity I had missed. Every person I had disappointed. Every dream that hadn't come true. The strange thing about pain is that it changes the way you see everything. A small setback feels enormous. A small rejection feels permanent. A bad day starts convincing you that your entire life is bad. And when enough difficult days arrive one after another, you begin wondering if things will ever change. I never told anyone how close I came to giving up on my own dreams. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want to become a burden. Everyone around me seemed to have their own struggles, their own responsibilities, their own worries, so I convinced myself that staying silent was the right thing to do. I carried everything alone, the fear, the disappointment, the loneliness, the exhaustion. I carried it all quietly. There were moments when I looked into the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back at me, not because my face had changed, but because my spirit had become tired. I had spent so much time pretending to be strong that I forgot what it felt like to be honest about my pain. And pain ignored does not disappear. It waits, it grows, it settles into the corners of your heart. I remember days when motivation disappeared completely. Things that once excited me felt meaningless. Goals that once inspired me seemed impossible. I would start something and immediately wonder if there was any point in continuing. The future felt distant. Hope felt fragile, and confidence became something I remembered having, rather than something I actually possessed. What made it harder was watching other people succeed. I was happy for them. Truly, but there was a small part of me that wondered when it would be my turn. When would life finally stop feeling like an endless, uphill climb? When would the struggle make sense? When would all the waiting lead somewhere beautiful? No one talks enough about that kind of heartbreak. Not the heartbreak caused by losing another person. The heartbreak caused by slowly losing faith in yourself. That's a different kind of pain. It's quiet. Invisible, difficult to explain. You can still smile, you can still work, you can still hold conversations. But inside, something feels broken. Inside, you're questioning everything. I wish I could tell you that I always stayed hopeful. I didn't. There were days when hope felt impossible. Days when I wondered whether my best years had already passed. Days when I questioned whether I deserved the things I wanted. Days when I felt forgotten by life itself. And yet, despite all of that, something inside me refused to disappear completely. A tiny spark remained. I couldn't always feel it. I couldn't always hear it. But it was there. A quiet voice reminding me that my story wasn't finished. At the time, I didn't know why that voice stayed with me. I didn't understand why I kept moving forward when every part of me wanted to stop trying. I didn't understand why I kept believing that something better existed, beyond the pain. Looking back now, maybe it was because my heart already knew something my mind didn't. Maybe somewhere deep inside, I believed that there was still love waiting for me, not just romantic love. Real love, the kind that understands your scars, the kind that doesn't run from your broken pieces. The kind that sees the darkness you've survived and still chooses to stay. Back then, I hadn't met you. I didn't know your name, I didn't know your smile, I didn't know where you were or what your life looked like. But somehow, the possibility of you existed. Not as a person yet, as hope. As a reminder that the future might contain something worth staying for, because every time life pushed me toward the edge of giving up, there was always a small feeling pulling me back. What if tomorrow is different? What if the story changes? What if the pain isn't the final chapter? What if someone is waiting to meet the version of you that survives this? Those questions became lifelines, small ones, fragile ones. But lifelines nonetheless. So I kept going. One difficult day at a time, one lonely night at a time, one uncertain step at a time. I kept moving forward even when I couldn't see where the road was leading. I kept believing even when belief felt weak. I kept holding on even when my hands were tired, because somewhere beneath all the disappointment, beneath all the fear, beneath all the moments when I felt lost, there remained a quiet desire to experience a love that would make every struggle meaningful, a love that wouldn't erase the pain, but would help me understand why I survived it, a love that would look at the scars and see strength, a love
that would listen to the stories
I never told anyone else. A love that would make me feel understood without needing to explain every wound, and, while I didn't know it then, that hope was slowly becoming connected to you. And maybe that's the part of the story that surprises me the most. Not that life was difficult, not that I struggled, not that I came close to losing faith. What surprises me is that even in my darkest moments, there was a part of my heart preparing a place for someone I had never met. For you, I didn't know it at the time. I thought I was simply surviving. I thought I was waking up each day because that's what people do. You get out of bed. You go to work. You carry your responsibilities. You make it through another day, but deep down, something more was happening. Every disappointment was teaching me how to appreciate loyalty. Every lonely night was teaching me how valuable companionship would someday feel. Every betrayal was teaching me the difference between attention and genuine care. Every heartbreak was teaching me that real love would have to be built on something deeper than temporary emotions. Life was shaping me while I thought it was breaking me. There is a difference. Unfortunately, you usually don't discover that difference until much later. At the time, all I could see were the losses, the dreams that didn't happen, the opportunities that disappeared, the relationships that faded away, the promises that were never kept, the people who said they would stay and then quietly walked away. I carried those memories with me for a long time, longer than I should have. I replayed conversations in my head, I analyzed mistakes. Repeatedly, I wondered what I could have done differently, what I could have said, who I could have been, as if changing the past inside my imagination could somehow change reality, but the past remained exactly where it was. And while I was staring backward, life continued moving forward. That realization hurt, because I began understanding how much time I had spent mourning versions of my life that no longer existed. I was grieving possibilities, imagining futures that never arrived. holding on to expectations that reality had already released, and the more tightly I held on to them, the more exhausted I became. Future wife, if you had seen me during those years, you might not have recognized the man speaking to you now. You would have seen someone trying very hard to appear okay, someone who knew how to hide sadness behind humor, someone who answered, "I'm fine," automatically, someone who carried wounds he didn't know how to discuss. I became an expert at pretending, not because I wanted to deceive people, because I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. How do you tell someone that you're tired in a way sleep cannot fix? How do you explain loneliness when people are physically around you? How do you describe an ache that doesn't have a visible source? I didn't have the words, so I remained silent, and silence became my closest companion. The problem with silence is that it creates space. And if you're not careful, fear will fill that space. Doubt will fill that space. Negative thoughts will fill that space. I started questioning my value, questioning whether I was enough, questioning whether anyone would ever truly understand me, questioning whether love like the kind I dreamed about actually existed. The world can be a noisy place, but insecurity always finds a way to whisper louder. It tells you that you're behind, it tells you that you're failing, it tells you that everyone else has figured life out except you. And if you listen long enough, those whispers start sounding like facts. For a while, I believed them. I believed I wasn't where I should be. I believed I had missed my chance. I believed happiness belonged to other people. People with better luck, better timing, better circumstances, better lives. I compared my struggles to their highlights, and comparison is a cruel teacher. It convinces you that your journey is worthless, simply because it looks different from someone else's. What I didn't realize then was that every person is fighting battles you cannot see. Every smile hides a story, every success hides sacrifices. Strong person carries scars. Pain isn't selective, difficulty isn't selective. Heartbreak isn't selective, we all experience them. But when you're trapped inside your own suffering, it's easy to forget that. You start believing you're alone, in ways that aren't actually true. I spent years learning lessons I never wanted to learn, lessons about disappointment, lessons about patience, lessons about endurance, lessons about letting go. And none of those lessons felt valuable, while I was living through them. They felt unfair. Pain rarely introduces itself as wisdom, it arrives as confusion, as frustration, as uncertainty. Only later do you discover what it was trying to teach you. One of the hardest lessons involved accepting that some people were only temporary chapters. I wanted permanence. I wanted consistency. I wanted people to stay, but life kept showing me that not everyone is meant to walk beside you forever. Some people arrive to teach. Some arrive to challenge. Some arrive to reveal hidden parts of yourself. And some arrive only long enough to prepare you for someone else. At first, I hated that truth. I fought against it. I tried holding on to connections that had already ended. I tried preserving things that life was asking me to release, because letting go felt like failure. But eventually, I realized something important. Not everything that ends is a mistake. Not everything that leaves is a loss. Sometimes things fall apart because they have completed their purpose. Sometimes doors close because they were never meant to become permanent homes. Sometimes life removes people from your story because their chapter is finished. Understanding that didn't remove the pain, but it helped me carry it differently. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" I slowly began asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" That question changed everything. Not immediately. Growth rarely happens immediately, but little by little, my perspective shifted. I stopped seeing myself as someone being punished by life. I started seeing myself as someone being shaped by it. The struggles remained, the uncertainty remained, the difficult days remained, but their meaning began changing. Every obstacle became evidence that I was still moving. Every setback became proof that I was still trying. Every scar became proof that I had survived something, and survival matters. People often underestimate survival. They celebrate victories. They celebrate achievements. They celebrate success. But sometimes the greatest accomplishment is simply refusing to quit, simply getting through another day, simply continuing despite exhaustion, simply choosing to stay when everything inside you wants to leave. There were countless moments when nobody applauded me. Nobody noticed my effort. Nobody knew how hard I was fighting. But I kept fighting anyway, quietly, imperfectly, one day at a time, because something deep within me still believed there was a reason for the waiting. A reason for the struggle, a reason for the unanswered prayers, a reason for the loneliness. I couldn't see that reason yet. I couldn't name it, but I felt it. The same way you feel sunlight before opening your eyes in the morning, the same way you sense rain before the clouds finally break, the same way your heart sometimes knows things before your mind understands them. And whenever life became overwhelming, I would imagine a future version of myself, a version that had survived, a version that understood, a version that could look back and finally make sense of everything. I imagined him sitting beside someone he loved, someone who knew his story, someone who understood his struggles, someone who looked at him not as a collection of mistakes but as a human being who had done his best. I didn't realize it then, but I was imagining you. Not your face, not your voice, not your name, just your presence, the feeling of being understood, the feeling of being chosen, the feeling of no longer carrying everything alone. And, whenever that image appeared in my mind, even briefly, it gave me strength. Not enough to solve every problem, not enough to erase every fear, but enough to continue, enough to keep believing that tomorrow deserved a chance. Enough to keep walking through seasons that seemed endless, enough to hold on to the possibility that somewhere beyond all the uncertainty, beyond all the disappointment, beyond all the years of searching and waiting, there was a woman Flava whose love would someday help me understand why I survived everything that nearly convinced me to surrender. Future wife. There is something I've wanted to tell you for a very long time. The reason I kept going wasn't because I was fearless, it wasn't because I always believed in myself. It wasn't because I had all the answers. The truth is much simpler than that. I kept going because somewhere deep inside my heart, I believed that one day I would meet someone worth staying alive for. Not someone who would save me. Not someone who would solve all my problems, but someone who would remind me why surviving mattered. Someone who would make all the difficult years feel meaningful. Someone who would make me grateful that I didn't walk away when life became heavy. And even before I knew your name, that someone was you. There were nights when I felt completely exhausted by life. Nights when I questioned everything. Nights when my future looked uncertain and my dreams felt distant. I would sit alone with my thoughts and wonder if anything beautiful was waiting for me ahead. I wondered if love like the kind I imagined actually existed. A love built on trust. A love built on loyalty. A love built on friendship. A love that remains when the excitement fades and real life begins. A love that chooses the same person again and again. A love that stays. I didn't know if I would ever find that kind of connection. But I hoped, and sometimes hope was all I had. People often think hope is something powerful and dramatic, but most of the time, hope is quiet. Hope is choosing tomorrow, when today hurts. Hope is taking another step when you're tired. Hope is believing in something you cannot yet see. That's what happened to me. I kept believing in a future I couldn't prove. A future where I would finally sit across from someone and feel understood. A future where I wouldn't have to explain every scar because she would already see the strength behind them. A future where I wouldn't have to pretend to be perfect. A future where I could simply be myself. And every time I imagined that future, my heart became a little lighter, because loneliness is easier to endure when you believe it isn't permanent. Waiting becomes easier when you believe someone is worth waiting for. Pain becomes easier to carry when you believe it has a purpose. You became that purpose long before I met you. Not because I knew who you were, but because I believed someone like you existed. A woman with a kind heart, a woman with patience, a woman with depth, a woman capable of loving not only the best parts of me but also the broken parts. I imagined her many times. I imagined the way she would listen, the way she would smile, the way she would understand things I struggled to explain. I imagined conversations that lasted late into the night. I imagined laughter after difficult days. I imagined peace, not perfection. Peace, and that dream carried me through years when reality felt difficult. Whenever life disappointed me, I reminded myself that my story wasn't finished. Whenever another door closed, I reminded myself that maybe the right door hadn't opened yet. Whenever I felt forgotten, I reminded myself that timing is not the same as rejection. Life was not saying no. Life was saying not yet. That lesson took years to learn, because when you're waiting, everything feels delayed. When you're hurting, everything feels permanent. When you're struggling, patience feels impossible. But now I understand something I couldn't understand back then. Some blessings take time because they are preparing two people at once. While I was learning how to heal, maybe you were learning too. While I was becoming stronger, maybe you were growing stronger as well. While I was learning how to love myself, maybe you were learning the same lesson. Maybe life wasn't separating us. Maybe life was preparing us. Preparing our hearts, preparing our minds, preparing our futures, so that when our paths finally crossed, we would recognize something familiar in each other. Not perfection. Resilience, not flawlessness. Growth, not a fairy tale. A partnership, future wife. There were moments when I almost stopped believing in love, not because I became bitter, but because disappointment can make anyone tired. You give your best, you trust, you hope. And sometimes things still fall apart. Sometimes people leave, sometimes promises break, sometimes expectations collapse, and after enough heartbreak, your heart bar becomes cautious. It wants proof before it trusts again. It wants guarantees before it believes again. But love doesn't work that way. Love requires faith. Faith in another person, faith in yourself, faith in the future, and somehow, despite everything, I never completely lost that faith. A small part of me continued believing. A small part of me continued hoping. A small part of me continued waiting. That part of me became stronger every year. Not because life became easier, because I began understanding that difficult experiences were teaching me what truly mattered. They taught me that attraction fades if respect is missing. They taught me that excitement fades if trust is missing. They taught me that connection fades if honesty is missing. Real love requires more than feelings. It requires character, commitment, patience, understanding, forgiveness. And every difficult lesson was preparing me to recognize those qualities when I found them. That's why I no longer regret the waiting. I no longer regret the lonely seasons. I no longer regret the years that felt uncertain, because those years taught me how valuable genuine love really is. Without loneliness, I might not appreciate companionship. Without heartbreak, I might not appreciate loyalty. Without struggle, I might not appreciate peace. Without waiting, I might not appreciate you. The truth is that every difficult chapter became part of the road leading toward our future. Every setback redirected me, every disappointment refined me, every obstacle strengthened me, every loss created space for something better. And one day, when we're sitting together and sharing stories about our lives, I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you about the nights nobody knew I was struggling. I'll tell you about the dreams that almost died. I'll tell you about the fears I carried. I'll tell you about the moments when I nearly lost hope. And then I'll tell you about the reason I kept going, because in every version of my future that brought me peace, there was always someone besides me, someone kind, someone loyal, someone genuine, someone who made life feel less heavy, someone who turned ordinary moments into memories, someone who reminded me that love isn't about rescuing each other, it's about walking together. And when that day comes, when we're finally sharing our lives instead of imagining them, you'll understand something important. You were never simply the reward at the end of my journey. You were part of the reason I survived the journey itself. The hope of meeting you someday became a light I carried through darkness. A promise I made to myself. A reminder that my story still had chapters left to write. And every time life asked me if I wanted to quit, every time pain suggested that I stop believing, every time fear tried to convince me that nothing better was coming, I held on to one simple thought: maybe she's out there, maybe she's living her own story right now, maybe she's fighting her own battles, maybe she's learning her own lessons, maybe she's waiting too. And if she is, then I need to keep going, I need to keep becoming the man she deserves to meet, I need to keep growing. Keep healing. Keep believing. So because somewhere beyond all the uncertainty, beyond all the years of searching, beyond all the difficult seasons, there is a future where our paths finally cross, our stories finally meet, and every reason I chose to stay alive becomes clear the moment I look into your eyes.